Zagan was an ogre-faced loser who went from a weak-ass street kid to a ripoff of Doctor Strange after defeating a sorcerer who tried to sacrifice him. After falling in love with an elf at an auction, Zagan spent all his money to buy her. Unfortunately, she didn't fall for his negative rees, so he tried all his Ryan Gosling impressions, which mostly failed miserably, while he also struggled to fight off those who wished to level up from defeating him, an accidental Arctimon. One day, a lady was attacked by a man whose face came right off when she slapped him. The psycho Two-Face wannabe just did his best Joker laugh before using his knife to slash her dress open. The shocked girl quickly covered herself up with her hands, but he assured her that he had no plans of clapping her cheeks, because all he wanted was to flay her face off, since the skin of a virgin was a good catalyst, making her realize he was a sorcerer. Immediately, she screamed, but it was useless as they were alone in the forest, or so they thought. The next moment, someone walked up to them and hoisted the guy in the air by his head. It turned out it was Zagan, another sorcerer, who demanded to know why they were making a ruckus and preventing him from sleeping. The guy tried to convince him to let him go by promising to share the fruits of his human experiments, but Zagan refused and squashed his head like a watermelon. Unfortunately, some of his blood touched the girl's face, and she fainted from shock, making Zagan worried that he had behaved like a violent gorilla. He realized that she would be traumatized by the things she had witnessed, so he used a spell to put everything back in place. When her clothes were repaired and the blood was gone, he noticed the cross she had around her neck and wondered if she was a member of the church. He knew that if she was, he could be blamed for what happened, because the church was self-proclaimed apostles of God and they hated all sorcerers. Zagan then decided to use teleportation magic to send her elsewhere, but when he tried to do it, his spell didn't work. He was confused as to what would be interfering with his magic until a magic circle appeared behind him. At that moment, he knew who it was, so he turned around and asked the person, whom he referred to as Barbatos, to stop messing with his magic circles. Barbatos ignored his friend and asked if he had interrupted something important, so Zagan explained that he had stopped a creep from assaulting a girl. Barbatos pointed out that just like the dead man, he was also a sorcerer and everyone knew sorcerers only cared about themselves. When he noticed the girl, he asked Zagan if he was going to sacrifice her, but he told her he wasn't into that kind of stuff before activating the circle and sending her off. He then told Barbatos that he was going to take a nap as he walked away, but Barbatos went after him. He tried to convince him to use magic to give himself an adrenaline boost to his brain, but Zagan said he didn't want him glitching like an overloaded 19's computer. When Barbatos realized Zagan wasn't going to listen to him, he informed him that Marcoses, the oldest Arctimon among the 13 Arctimon, was dead. Zagan was surprised by this, because the Arctimons were practically royalty in the Sorcerer's Society. Barbatos also told him that there was going to be an underground auction of Marcoses' property. Later on, as they made their way inside the city, Zagan told Barbatos that the only reason he informed him about the auction was because his broke ass wanted to borrow money from him. Barbatos didn't deny it and said Zagan was the only person who had given money. When he noticed some girls waving and smiling at them, he told Zagan that if he gave him some money, he'd be his wingman and hook him up with some hot baddies. Just then, a soldier ran past them and went to speak with his captain. So Zagan asked why the city was crawling with soldiers. Barbatos explained that someone was kidnapping women to use for sorcery experiments, which made Zagan hope that whoever the dumbass idiot was, he wasn't planning on summoning a demon. When they arrived at the auction, they found some seats, and Barbatos pointed out 3 powerful sorcerers to Zagan. The first was Chimerus the Black Blade, the second was Gremory the Enchantress, and the last was Valifor the Apparition. Barbatos explained that all 3 of them were candidates for Arctimon, now that the oldest one was dead. Zagan asked how one became an Arctimon, and Barbatos told him that the remaining 12 Arctimons would debate on it and decide. Unknown to them, Chimerus and Gremory were talking about them, and Gremory admitted that she was surprised to see that a no-name loser like Zagan was being considered for Arctimon. The next moment, their attention was drawn to the center of the auction room, where an elf was being auditioned. The moment Zagan set his eyes on her, his heart began beating like crazy, as he seemed to have fallen for the girl. Before the bidding could begin, Zagan offered 1,000,000 gold to buy her, shocking everyone. Barbatos thought he was crazy for offering such an amount, and asked what kind of experiment he wanted to do that required such an expensive investment. Zagan only smiled at him like a creep before he floated down to claim his new prize, and the auctioneer assured him that she wasn't harmed in any way. When he asked about the collar on her neck, the man explained that it was to prevent her from running away. Zagan examined her with a neutral expression, but inside, he was freaking out because he wanted to speak with her. Unfortunately, when he voiced this thought out, He sounded like a dirty sleazeball because he said he couldn't wait to hear the happy sounds she made. His words shocked everyone, but the clueless Gnu had no idea why they were looking at him with disgust. That night, Zagan sat on his throne while the elf girl sat before him, and even though he looked very intimidating, he was freaking out inside. The truth was, Zagan had never spoken to a girl in his life, and he was scared that he would make things awkward the moment he opened his mouth. Fortunately, the girl saved him the trouble and asked how she was going to be executed, which surprised him. He immediately told her that he needed her alive, but she misinterpreted his response and asked if she was to expect a fate worse than death as she looked at the torture equipment he had. Since Zagan didn't know how to explain that the previous owner had left them behind, he then sat back down and introduced himself to her. But of course, he didn't know how to ask for her name. However, she told him her name was Nephelia and asked Nephi, which got him excited, but he had to play it down. When he asked what her last name was, she told him she didn't have one because she was a cursed child. This made him curious, but she shocked him when she raised her dress and said he had nothing to worry about as she was still a virgin. Zagan got so red-faced and told her he wasn't interested in what she was offering. Nephi was surprised as she believed that was the reason he had bought her, but he assured her it wasn't the case. But when she asked why he had bought her, he told her it wasn't her business because he didn't want to appear as a pathetic simp by telling her that he had fallen hopelessly in love with her. In an attempt to change the topic, he asked her to follow him so he could show her to her room. Nephi asked if he wanted her to choose the room she would die, but he assured her that he had no plans to take her life. She still wasn't convinced, and it made him realize that the people who took her had probably told her she would become a test subject or a sacrifice. He also figured out that she had no home to return to as she had already told him she was a cursed child. It made him think of his life as a street urchin, which only strengthened the connection he felt with her. So he told her that he bought her because he needed her, and ordered her not to speak about dying again as she was going to live for his sake, which surprised her. When they got to the front of the room he intended to give her, Zagan opened the door and discovered it was another execution room. He immediately shut the door and came up with a dumb lie about the room being a trap to protect the castle from airborne enemies. He then used explosive magic to destroy the things in the room, which shocked Nephi and made him realize that hanging out with Barbatos would destroy his non-existent love life because he kept learning stupid things from him. When he tried suggesting that she take another room, Nephi went to stand outside on the balcony. After looking at the moon for a while, she asked if she could take the room and he agreed. By the time morning rolled around, Zagan hadn't slept a wink because Nephi had slept next to him, so he got up and went in search of food. When he returned, Nephi was already awake, so he offered her the breakfast he brought. While they ate, Nephi asked why he was eating the same food as she was since she considered it to be something meant for slaves. Zagan realized he'd been eating the same thing for as long as he could remember, so he had no idea what kinds of food normal people ate. Nephi then offered to cook for him, causing the numbskull to jump because it was the first time in his life someone had offered to do something like that. He told Nephi they would head into town to buy some groceries, but they tried to get a ride into town and the driver told them how much they needed to pay. Zagan remembered he was now as poor as a church mouse since he used all his money to buy Nephi. Rather than admit he was now dirt poor, he suggested they walk to town because it was a nice way to exercise. As they walked, Zagan wondered how he would make some money. He even considered bullying the carriage driver but pushed the thought aside because he didn't want Nephi to be scared of him. At some point he considered selling his castle and opening a restaurant for Nephi. Just then, they heard the carriage driver scream, and when they turned around they noticed the carriage was being attacked by some thieves. Zagan tried to leave, but when he noticed the scared look on Nephi's face, he wondered if that had been the same way she was kidnapped. He decided to ease her mind by getting rid of the thieves, even though he claimed he was getting rid of trash. First, he attacked them with a lightning spell to get their attention. So, when the boss attacked him, he broke his axe and flicked his head. The remaining thieves called out to the sorcerer helping them, and he used flames to draw a magic circle on the ground. When he tried activating it, he discovered he couldn't do it, and Zagan revealed that he had taken control of it. He then activated it and took the man down using a powerful lightning strike, as though he were Storm from X-Men. When the thieves realized that their trump card had been defeated, they ran away like the pathetic wimps they were. After they were gone, Zagan tried to assure Nephi that they were harmless, but she insisted they weren't. The people from the carriage laughed at how innocent she was as they surrounded both of them and thanked Zagan for saving them. The driver even gave him a bag of coins and begged him to join them for the rest of the journey into town, so he could protect them from any danger. Zagan couldn't believe it was that easy to make money and began considering changing occupations and becoming a full-time muscle for hire. However, when he remembered that sorcerers were the most hated people, he changed his mind. As he watched the people praise Neffy, he wondered if they were being nice to him because of her. After they arrived in town, he took Neffy to a clothing store to get a new dress and asked the shopkeeper to help her. The girl, whose name was Manuela, was glad to help, but Sagan noticed her behavior changed when she noticed Neffy's collar. While the girls tried out some clothes, Sagan remembered what the auctioneer had said about the collar. He couldn't dwell on it for much longer, because Manuela called his attention to Neffy, who was dressed like a seductive vixen. Sagan was shocked by her appearance and asked Manuela why she had dressed Neffy up like a red light district hoe. Manuela was confused and said she'd done it because she thought he was into kinky ass stuff like that. When he turned to look at Neffy, she turned away shyly and begged him not to look at her, so he instructed Manuela to find her something else to wear. Eventually, they emerged from the dressing room, and this time around Neffy was dressed in normal clothes. Sagan asked if she liked them, and she told him that as long as he was okay with it, she didn't mind. On their way out of the store, Manuela told Neffy she was lucky to have a master who cared about her, which surprised her. Sagan then called her attention and pointed to a blacksmith shop, saying they were heading there next. Inside the shop, he asked the blacksmith to remove her collar, which made her ask why. So he told her it was because she didn't need it anymore. After the blacksmith examined it, he told Sagan that the collar was enchanted, and that removing it by force would turn Neffy into the Headless Horseman. He advised him to find the original key, but Sagan knew it would be hard because no one at the auction had it. He then thanked the man and dropped some coins on the table as payment, but the man refused to accept them. He said Sagan had once saved him and his daughter, so he wasn't going to charge him for anything. Sagan had no recollection of this incident but wondered if Neffy had something to do with people being nice to him. After leaving the shop, they went to buy groceries, but Sagan didn't want Neffy stressing herself out after a long day, so he took her to a restaurant. At the restaurant, Neffy asked if he wasn't worried about her running away after he took off her collar. Sagan knew it was a possibility, but instead of admitting it, he told her not to get her hopes up about the collar being removed. However, he regretted the words the moment they left his mouth because he was afraid he would scare her away. When he noticed she wasn't eating, he asked if it was because she couldn't use cutlery, and she admitted that she had never eaten at a table before. This made him remember that the reason he felt drawn to her in the first place was because they were similar. He then told her not to overthink it and eat however she liked, so she grabbed a spoon and picked up a tomato. After she ate it, she admitted it was tasty and fed Sagan one when she noticed him struggling to pick it up with his fork. In return, Sagan fed her another one, but when they realized their public display of affection was making those around them laugh and point at them, they left the restaurant. The next day, the girl Sagan had rescued from the evil sorcerer sat in her office thinking about the events of that day. She was convinced it wasn't a dream because her team had been tasked with saving the kidnapped victims. However, on their way back, one of the knights turned on them and took her to where Sagan saved her. While she was still lost in thought, one of the church leaders came into the room, so she told her to greet him. The man then informed her that they had done some investigation and discovered that Sagan was the mastermind behind the kidnappings, which shocked her. Days later, Neffy found Sagan in the library going through some books when she walked in to clean the place, so she asked what he was reading. When he told her it was a sorcery book, she pointed to some papers that had magic circles on them and asked what they were. Sagan said they were all part of learning magic and asked if elven sorcery was different from human sorcery. Neffy admitted that she couldn't use sorcery, which surprised him because he could tell that she had a high level of mana. He then decided to show her how sorcery worked by drawing a magic circle on the floor. He explained that by channeling mana into the circle, you could get it to do what you wanted, so he did that and created lightning. Sagan also explained that adding more symbols would increase its potency and allow one to direct it as they saw fit. He told her that anyone could use a magic circle, which was why sorcerers put restrictions on them, to prevent other sorcerers from hijacking the circle and overriding their control. Neffy then asked if it was possible to add symbols to the middle of the circle, and he said that it was possible. He explained that it required creating another magic circle inside one that was already completed. However, doing so disrupted the flow of mana, meaning that both circles wouldn't activate or run amok. Neffy asked if by doing so one could override another sorcerer's abilities, and he told her yes. He also told her that anyone capable of doing so would be the greatest sorcerer to live after Merlin, but said that no one could ever reach that level. It seemed Neffy enjoyed listening to him, because she asked if anyone could use sorcery as long as they knew the basics of it, and he said yes. She then pointed out that it was the first time he had ever spoken with her for an extended amount of time. Sagan shyly admitted that he could only talk about sorcery because it was all he knew. After a while, She asked what he intended to do with all the power he had gained, and he said he wanted to survive. He told her that while growing up, he lived on the streets and was kidnapped by a sorcerer who intended to use him as a sacrifice. Fortunately, he had got rid of the man before he could go through with his plans, and that was the day that he decided to get stronger if he wanted to live. Neffy felt his story was inspiring but said no matter what she did, she couldn't get stronger. Zagan then walked up to her and was about to offer to teach her sorcery when the wards he'd put around the castle alerted him of intruders. He instructed Neffy to prepare dinner while he went to send their unwanted guest home. Outside, Chastil and 3 other knights were in the forest surrounding the castle, and one of them pointed out that they had been walking around in circles. Chastil told him it was because of a protective barrier and pulled out her magic sword, known not Excalibur, but a cheap knockoff, and used it to cut through the barrier. At that moment, Zagan appeared in front of the castle with as much dramatic flair as a parlor trick magician and asked why they had come to disturb him. When one of the knights tried to argue with him, Chastil stopped him. It was then that Zagan noticed her sword as one of the 12 sacred swords said to have slain the Lord of the Fiends. He also recognized her as the girl he had saved from the unhinged face ripper, and immediately regretted his decision. Immediately he attacked with a lightning spell, but one of the knights blocked it with his anointed shield. Another knight asked Chastil to leave Zagan to them as they charged at him. Zagan punched him with as much force as a Kinu used to punch Ace. The last knight tried to avenge his friends even though Chastil ordered him to retreat. Zagan simply broke his sword and flicked his forehead like it was a speck of dust. When Chastil tried attacking, Zagan stepped on the poor guy's face and told her that if she didn't want him to make tomato sauce with his head, she'd better drop her weapon. Chastil did as he ordered and asked why he was trying to humiliate them for losing against him by torturing her fellow knight. Zagan admitted that he was doing it to instill fear in them, because if he simply gave them a free pass to the afterlife, the church would simply write them off as casualties. However, if he made an example out of them, they would return and spread the gospel about what happened to them, causing others to fear him. Chastil asked if his middle name was Pinocchio, because she didn't believe a word he'd said. Zagan knew she had seen through his lies, but he wasn't ready to admit that he didn't want Neffy to freak out if he started keeping dead bodies around the castle. She then picked up her sword and attacked him, but he blocked it using a magic circle which cracked from the force of her sword. Chastil kept swinging her sword at him, but Zagan kept dodging her attacks, which annoyed her. When she asked if he didn't deem her worthy enough to fight him, Zagan said his mentor Sanji would be disappointed in him if he beat up a girl, most especially if she was someone who reminded him of Neffy, but he didn't let her know that. When she tried to attack again, Zagan quickly blocked using a magic circle before he caught the blade between his hands, but she channeled her inner Hulk, lifted him in the air, and threw him at a nearby tree. Zagan realized she had been holding back and also noticed that his injuries were taking longer to heal because of her sword. When she tried to strike him again, he caught the hilt of the sword in his hand, causing it to slash the tree in half. It was also at that moment he decided to end things, but Chastil whispered in his ear, suggesting that he play dead. She told him that if she failed to get rid of him, the church would send someone stronger after him until they succeeded in slaying him. Zagan recognized the risk she was taking to try and help him, but he also knew that running away like a spineless coward would put Neffy in danger. The next moment, almost as if thinking of her had summoned her, Neffy ran out of the castle calling out his name. One of the knights threw his spear at her even though Chastil ordered him to back down, so Zagan pushed her out of the way and got hurt instead. Seeing her master hurt got Neffy angry, so she attacked the knight using trees to wrap around him as she tried to squeeze him to death. Zagan had to pull her back and begged her to stop before things got out of hand. Later that night, after Neffy bandaged his hands, Zagan asked what power she had used against the knight, because he remembered she told him she couldn't use sorcery. Neffy told him it wasn't sorcery, but an ability called mysticism, which was an ability that allowed a person to tap into powers beyond natural laws by just wishing for it. Zagan asked if all elves could use it, and she told him she was the only one because she was a cursed child. She said that the power wasn't supposed to exist and elf children with white hair weren't supposed to be born either. She had the misfortune of being born with both, so the people in her village treated her like an outcast and a slave. One day the village was attacked, and the villagers ordered her to protect them with her powers as a way to repay them for allowing her to stay in the village. Neffy said she had allowed herself to be captured, and as she watched the people who treated her worse than garbage die, she could only feel happiness. Zagan told her she had done nothing wrong, and insisted that if the dead villagers were still holding a grudge against her even in death, they were nothing but petty assfools. He said that a strong person should live a strong life, and told her of the time a girl he had saved called him evil. He said it was obvious the girl had been overpampered and didn't understand the harsh reality of life. But he had seen it and was determined not to allow fate to play ping pong with his future one more time, so he fought hard to survive. He asked Neffy to hold her head high as she didn't do anything wrong, and told her that even though others didn't want her, he wanted her. Neffy burst into tears and hugged him, so he allowed her to cry her heart out. When she finally calmed down, she apologized for acting like a baby before she asked if his hands were still hurting. Zagan told her it stopped hurting a while ago, and when he took off the bandage, he was surprised to see that he was completely healed. He realized it was because he touched Neffy and told himself that it was a good thing she had such power. When he thanked her, Neffy looked at him strangely, causing him to ask if there was a problem. So she told him that he had never thanked her before. Zagan couldn't believe he was already failing in his rising attempts, so he apologized for being a heartless jerk. Later that night, while he sat on his throne like the Dark Lord of Glum and Doomed, Neffy came to him and asked if he wanted to sleep with her.
Yeah, baby! Yeah.
The never-been-laid virgin was shocked because he thought it was Get Laid Friday, and he was about to cash in his V coupon. Trying to play it cool, he asked if she understood the implications of what she was asking him to do. Neffy said that she did and explained that sleeping on his throne every night wasn't good, so she wanted him to rest on a proper bed. When he realized she wasn't offering him a night of raunchy pleasure, it shattered his unholy thoughts. He also turned down her offer, saying that he needed to be in the throne room in case there was an intruder. Neffy already anticipated his response, so she suggested he lay his head on her lap. He willed himself not to act like an overexcited teenager, hanging out with his crush, and accepted her request. As he lay on her lap, he couldn't help but feel like he was on cloud nine. But when he opened his eyes and noticed her milkshakes so close to his face, he turned away. He then asked if wanted to learn sorcery, because he had noticed that she had a hard time controlling her mysticism. He said learning sorcery might help her learn to control her powers and protect herself. He also told her that he knew she would be very good at it and might even surpass him one day. Neffy told him she was willing to learn as long as she could protect him, so he agreed to teach her. The next day, Barbatos came to visit Zagan because he had heard the angelic knights had attacked him. However, he was surprised to see him completely fine and unharmed, so he asked if Chastil was just pretty with a big sword. But Zagan admitted that she was strong, since she had destroyed most of his barriers. He also told Barbatos to stop destroying his barriers every time he came over, because it was a hassle to replace them. Just then, Neffy served Barbatos tea, but when he realized who she was, he threw the cup. Zagan had to use a spell to keep the tea from spilling, as Barbatos asked why he hadn't sacrificed her yet. He told him that she was his apprentice, which made Barbatos ask if he'd finally lost his marbles. Zagan told him it wasn't unusual for sorcerers to have apprentices, and said Neffy already had the skills to become a good sorcerer. Barbatos then asked if she had a hand in running the knights off when they attacked, and he told him yes. Barbatos sat quietly for a moment before he asked Zagan if he was also going after the Arctuman position. Zagan thought about it for a while because the only reason he was even considering it was so that he could keep Neffy safe. He also knew that the chances of him being chosen were slim to none, but he was willing to give it a chance. When he told Barbatos about it, he simply nodded his head and took his leave, surprising them. Neffy pointed out that Zagan looked happy talking to Barbatos, but Zagan refused to accept that he was friends with a dim-witted idiot. He then told her he was going outside to replace the barriers and asked her to come with him, as it was to be her first lesson. Weeks passed and Zagan continued teaching Neffy sorcery, and just like he had expected, she was doing very well even though she still had a hard time controlling her mysticism powers. A month later, he received a letter from the remaining 12 archimans, summoning him to their stronghold. When he arrived, they informed him that he had been chosen to become the 13th reason why, the 13th Arctuman. They'd also informed him that he was to inherit the emblem of Marchosias, but Zagan was surprised by how much power it exuded. He then asked why they had chosen him amongst all the other candidates, who were more suited for the position. They admitted that he wasn't as qualified as the others, but they also knew there was no sorcerer alive who could take his life. They said the first person he ever defeated was a very powerful sorcerer, yet he was able to learn his magic by looking at it once. They'd all agreed that his ability would allow him to take from others, and make him the greatest sorcerer to ever live. Which was why they were giving him the position of Arctuman, even though he was a no-name sorcerer. Zagan pointed out that he could also take away their powers because of his ability, but they reminded him that they had the power to take away the things he held dear to him, making him think of Neffy. Zagan realized that he had only two choices, either he joined them or he died, so he told them he would accept the position under one condition. After he told them what he wanted, they agreed to give it to him, so he accepted the emblem and a new title. That night, when he returned home, he met Neffy in the kitchen making dinner. She was so excited to see him, but noticed he was acting strangely, so she asked what the problem was. Zagan told her of his new position as Arctimon and explained that as part of his new appointment, he was given everything that belonged to Marcosius, including the key to her collar. He then unlocked it and told her to leave as he no longer had use for her. Later on, Neffy found herself in a street corner in the middle of town and decided to return home. However, when she noticed her broken collar, she remembered what Zagan had said to her, but for some reason, she wasn't able to cry. Chastil was on her way home when she came across Neffy, so she asked if she was alright. When Neffy noticed her, she recognized her as the knight who attacked Zagan, so she begged her to take her life. Chastil tried to explain that she was a cold-blooded murderer, but Neffy kept insisting, which drew the attention of the people around. When they realized it was Neffy, they began scolding Chastil for harassing her. Manuela, the shopkeeper, even got between the two girls and accused Chastil of harassing a poor defenseless girl because she was a knight. The people kept clamoring for her to leave until Neffy spoke up and said she had done nothing to her. Chastil had already fallen to her knees and was crying as she tried to convince the people that she was innocent. Eventually, the three girls went to a restaurant, and after a waitress served Neffy some food and she tasted it. She remembered she had made the same dish for Zagan and began to cry, causing the other girls to worry. Eventually, Neffy finished her food and told the girls what happened, so Manuela asked if anything strange had happened to make him do what he did. Neffy recalled his announcement when he returned home and asked the girls who an Arctimon was. Manuela explained that they were powerful sorcerers and said that Marchosius used to control the town, but since he died, the sorcerers had started committing more crimes and kidnapping people to be used as sacrifices. Neffy then asked why the townspeople didn't seem to like the angelic knights, so Manuela told her it was because they demanded the people pay them protection money like some street thugs. Neffy pointed out that since Chastil hadn't been the one to go around demanding money like a loan shark, there was no need to treat her badly. Chastil felt happy that someone was on her side and said she now understood why Zagan had kept Neffy by his side. She then explained that the 13 Arctimon were the church's sworn enemies, and the moment Marcosius was replaced, there would be trouble. She said the church would try to slay the new Arctimon before their power would grow, while other sorcerers would attack them to challenge their position. Her words made Neffy wonder if Zagan had sent her away, because he didn't want her to get dragged into the mess being an Arctimon would cause. Her thoughts were cut short by Chastil, who asked if Zagan was capable of conniving with other sorcerers to kidnap people. Neffy told her that Zagan would never do something like that because he hated weak people more than anything else in the world. She told them of the time he'd saved a carriage from some bandits, but had said he was only getting rid of an annoying thing. However, she suspected he had done it because she felt uneasy about the entire situation. Chastil then added that he had held back during her fight with him because she was a woman, which meant he considered her a weakling. Manuela teased her for acting like a heartbroken girl, but she argued that it wasn't the case. She told them that when she first met Zagan, he looked like someone in need of help, but she also knew that if she offered to help him, he would turn her down. Neffy was surprised to see that someone other than her had noticed the sadness in Zagan's eyes, so she got up and announced she was returning to him. Chastil assured her that she would do her best to clear Zagan's name as he was being accused wrongly. Before she could leave, Manuela told her that if she ever needed help, she could come to her, making Neffy ask why she was nice to her. Manuela told her it was because they were friends, and when Neffy admitted she had never had a friend, Manuela said she was glad to be her first friend. Chastil also asked Manuela if they could be friends, and she teased her about befriending an associate of a sorcerer. Just then, Chastil's knights arrived, and when the guy Neffy had attacked saw her, he began cowering in fear. Suddenly, the restaurant was covered in shadows, so Chastil pushed Manuela out of the way, allowing her to fly away. The shadows then swallowed Neffy and Chastil, but told the knights that he was Zagan and said if they wanted the girls back, they would come to his castle. Later on, the knights found themselves in a trap Zagan had set with Neffy, and when Zagan tried to walk away, one of them grabbed his foot. Just as he begged Zagan to let Chastil go, Manuela mistook his head for a landing strip and landed on him. When they began arguing, Zagan tried teleporting them off his property, but he stopped when Manuela told him Neffy had been kidnapped. Zagan was shocked as he blamed himself for putting her in danger, but Manuela screamed at him to do something to save her friends. When she began hitting his chest, his thoughts went to Neffy, so he thanked her and said he would get Neffy back. After creating a transport circle, he asked Manuela to join him, and she agreed. Before they could leave, the three stooges begged him to take them along so they could save Chistil. Meanwhile, Nephi and Chistil were chained up in a cave somewhere, and Barbatos revealed himself to them, so Nephi asked why he was betraying Zagan. Barbatos told her that the sorcerer Zagan had slayed as a child was his teacher, but he wasn't on some path of revenge like the Punisher. He said the reason he was trying to bring Zagan down was because Zagan had taken everything that belonged to his master, and he believed it was meant to be his. Barbatos admitted that he had made the church believe Zagan was the one behind the kidnappings. Unfortunately, his incompetent lackeys had left a lot of evidence, and those the church sent to attack Zagan all got a royal beating. Chistil couldn't believe he'd framed Zagan for all his shady crimes, but Barbatos told her that the face stealer was the one who came up with the sacrifice plans. He only agreed to it because it was a way for him to show the 12 archimans that he was worthy enough to join their ranks. The church had halted his plans by rescuing the victims, but now that he had Nephi, he was sure she would be the key to his ascension to Archimon. Nephi told him that it was nothing but a hopeless dream, and revealed that Zagan had already been chosen to become the 13th Archimon. Barbatos couldn't accept that Zagan had once again taken what he believed was his, so he pulled Nephi's chains from the wall and began dragging her away. He said all he had to do was get rid of Zagan and take his place, using the magic circle he was creating. Chistil begged him to let Nephi go and take her instead, but he told her that her time would come soon. He said the ritual he needed Nephi for required high-quality tools, making Nephi remember how she'd always been regarded as a tool all her life. Zagan was the only person who didn't treat her that way, so she began struggling against Barbatos. She said she was going to return to her master because she belonged to him and wished to live the rest of her life with him. Barbatos felt she was being disrespectful, so he tried to hurt her, but he stopped midway because Zagan broke down the wall. Barbatos was surprised to see him and asked how long he'd known he was the culprit, so Zagan explained that he'd figured it out since the beginning. He said that when he encountered the face stealer and he begged for mercy, he knew right there that a useless waste of space like him couldn't have broken his barriers easily. It made him think of the one person who made it his duty to break his barriers every now and then, and Barbatos only confirmed his suspicions by always showing up after he'd been attacked. Barbatos then asked why he hadn't confronted him, and Zagan said he just wanted to see how low he could go. When he looked in Nephi's direction, he told Barbarous that he would pay for hurting her. Barbatos tried to attack, but he quickly slashed his hands and his knees before he freed Nephi from her chains. After he asked Nephi if she was hurt, she told him yes and hugged him, but to his surprise, she told him he was also hurt. Zagan couldn't understand what she was saying, but she insisted that he needed someone by his side and said she would never leave him again. Barbatos interrupted their heartfelt moment by trying to attack Zagan again, but every magic circle he created disappeared before his eyes. Seeing the confused look on his stupid-ass face, Zagan explained that he had cast the same circle, which overwrote the one Barbatos cast from inside. Barbatos refused to back down and cast more magic circles at once, but the results were the same. Barbatos demanded to know how he had done it, and Zagan said he'd spent his days studying to improve himself. He then showed him what he'd turned his magic circles into, and told him that the name he had received upon his ascension to Archimon was Sorcerer Slayer right before he directed the spells at him. Barbatos couldn't avoid getting hit, and as he lay on the floor, he acknowledged that Zagan was at a higher level than he was. He tried pleading for his life, but his pleas fell on deaf eyes as Zagan threw another spell-filled punch his way. The force of the punch broke the chains holding Chistil up, freeing her and allowing Manuela to help her. However, Zagan hadn't gone full Saitama and punched Barbatos' lights out. Instead, he punched the ground. Barbatos asked why he hadn't finished him off, and he said if he had done that, there would be no one around to buy him booze. Barbatos swore that he wouldn't rest until Zagan was dead, but Zagan told him to do his worst. Defeated, Barbatos accepted his fate and told Zagan that he was nothing but a cocky but Zagan said he was just confident. He then turned to look at Manuel, who was carrying Chistil, but before he could speak, the magic circle Barbatos had drawn on the floor activated. Zagan tried to get the girls to leave, but it was too late as something was already manifesting. He asked Barbatos what he had been trying to summon, and he admitted that it was a demon. As he watched the demon, he realized that they were no match for it, because he could feel the intense power radiating off it. Just when he was about to accept his weakness, the demon bowed before him and called him master. Everyone, including Zagan, was surprised, but he realized it was only bowing to him because of the emblem on his hand. He then ordered the demon to return, so it obeyed his command. As soon as the magic circle disappeared, the cave began shaking. Zagan carried Nephi in his arms and asked the others to hold on to him as he got them out of the cave. When they got outside, Chastil's knights approached them and took Chastil before going on their way. Manuela told Zagan to work things out with Nephi before she left with the knights and Chastil. Barbatos was the last to leave, and he reminded Zagan of his promise to let him off the hook as long as he brought him booze. Finally, Zagan and Nephi were alone, but the two just stood like lifeless mannequins because they didn't know what to say. Eventually, Nephi spoke up and said she wanted to remain at his side no matter what, so he agreed. However, he got on one knee and begged her to call him by his name from there onwards because she was neither his slave nor servant. When he tried to tell her he loved her, he chickened out and told her that they would always be together even in death. While he berated himself for being a riskless idiot, Nephi pulled out her collar from her pocket and asked him to put it on her. Zagan tried to refuse, but she insisted that it was a symbol of their bond, so he put it on her. As they watched the sunrise, Nephi asked what they were to each other now that they weren't master and slave, but Zagan said nothing as he didn't know how to say he wanted them to be lovers. Later on, Chastil informed the cardinal that she was not going to lead the hunt against Zagan because he was innocent. The cardinal was annoyed that she was defending a sorcerer, so he relieved her of her duties indefinitely. Chastil didn't argue with him and turned in her sword even though she wondered if she was doing the right thing. The cardinal told her not to hold his decision against him, as he was only doing it for her good, and promised to reinstate her as soon as possible. He also informed her that Raphael, the most dreadful of the sacred sword wielders, would be arriving soon. Hearing this made Chastil's blood run cold, as she was sure he had been summoned to get rid of her for her insolence towards the church. 2 weeks later, Zagan was in his library, trying to find anything that could shed more light on his Arctuman crest. He was still curious as to why the demon had bowed to him, or rather the crest. The next moment, he noticed Nephi sneaking into the library and decided not to say anything. He continued acting oblivious to her presence until she tried to cover his eyes with her hands and failed. Zagan pointed out that it had been a dumb idea seeing as he was standing on a ladder, and she could pass as one of Snow White's 7 dwarves. Nephi felt a bit embarrassed that her plan to tease him hadn't worked but brushed it aside and informed him that lunch was ready. Zagan happily went to the dining room, and while they were there, Nephi told him Manuela had taught her the recipe. This made him ask if the low-budget Monette had done anything weird to her while they were together. Nephi assured him that all she did was make her try on clothes, but Zagan knew none of those said clothes were appropriate for the public. Just as he began eating his dessert, which made him as happy as a kid on Halloween, he suddenly sensed someone outside his barrier. The uninvited guest, who turned out to be Valefor, broke through the barrier and traps, and then went to confront Zagan in the dining room. Zagan recognized him as one of the former Arctuman candidates, and Valefor told him he had come to slay him. In response to his revelation, Zagan told him to wait until he was done eating to carry out his plan. Annoyed by Zagan's blatant disregard for his presence, Valefor's arm suddenly changed to resemble that of a reptile, and he tried to slash Zagan, but Zagan caught it. Valefor then attempted to fire a beam at him, which annoyed Zagan, so he smacked Valefor and sent him flying across the room. His helmet came off, and when Nephi rushed to his side to check up on him, she discovered he was a little girl, so she informed Zagan. Nephi then made him carry Valefor to a spare bedroom, and when she woke up later, she tried to punch Zagan, but he stopped her. He then asked why she had attacked him, and she admitted that since he was known as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, sorry Zagan the Sorcerer Slayer, she had hoped defeating him would be easy as she didn't use sorcery. Zagan agreed that his powers would have little effect on her since she was a dragon, which surprised Nephi, who had no idea Valefor was a dragon. Zagan felt sympathy for her, because she reminded him of when he was a child, so he told her she was to help Nephi with her chores for a week as punishment for trying to attack him. This made Valefor ask if he planned to eat her later since humans believed eating a dragon would make them stronger. Nephi asked if what she said was true, and Zagan confirmed it, saying there were stories of dragon remains being used for various things, but said he had no desire to do the same to Valefor. He then ordered Nephi to bring some soup for Valefor, and while she ate, he tried to leave, but Valefor asked if he wasn't afraid she'd hurt Nephi or try to run away. Zagan told her that a pipsqueak such as herself could do no harm to Nephi, and reminded her that he knew her secret, so running away wasn't an option. Despite his earlier declaration that Valefor wasn't strong enough to hurt Nephi, Zagan watched both girls as they did the laundry and overheard Nephi ask Valefor if she was scared of him. In response, Valefor said what scared her wasn't his stupid face, but the power he wielded. A week later, Valefor came into the library to inform Zagan that dinner was ready and asked why he wasn't bothered that she could attack him at any moment. This made him remember Barbatos' threat to slay him, so he smiled and asked her to try her best. During dinner, he informed Nefi of his intention to search Marchoj's castle for anything relating to demons and his crest. When he mentioned that he wished to take Valefor with him, Valefor asked if stupidity was one of his many traits, because no one in their right mind would let their enemy near any vital information or secret they kept for fear of it being stolen. Zagan told her he didn't care if she stole from him, because he believed knowledge and techniques were meant to be stolen. When Valefor asked why he was being nice to her, Zagan said it was because she was a child and children had no business acting like grown-ups, which made her tear up. To make her feel better, he gave her a pat on the head and told her not to worry, as no one would dare harm her as long as she had ties with him. Later that night, as Nefi and Zagan watched Valefor sleep, Nefi pointed out they looked like a family, which surprised Zagan, but he didn't seem to hate the idea of them being a family. A few days later, Zagan and Nefi took Valefor to Manuela's store to get her a cape, and the crazy bird lady begged them to let her keep her. But Zagan told her she wasn't an object. After they left the store, Valefor held both their hands, making Zagan feel an odd protective feeling wash over him. In another part of the town, Asad Chestil walked around feeling glad that her withdrawal would delay the haunt for Zagan, who she hoped would live a happy life with Nefi. She imagined they would visit her grave together long after she was gone. The next moment, she screamed in surprise as she laid eyes on Zagan, Nefi, and Valefor, who all looked like a picture-perfect family taking a casual walk around town. When she approached them, Valefor asked Zagan who Chastil was, and believe it or not, the numbskull had no idea who she was. Nefi had to mention Chastil's name before the idiot twat remembered who she was. Just then, the Three Stooges, otherwise known as Chastil's Knights, rushed towards them as they scolded Chastil for walking about unprotected. While they talked, Zagan sensed Valefor's bloodlust and noticed her arm had changed, so he told her to put it away, saying he didn't want any of Nefi's friends getting hurt if a fight broke out. Chastil was then dragged away by the knights, who told her the cardinal had sent for her, leaving Zagan to hope Valefor's obvious hate for knights wouldn't lead to problems later on. Later at Marchoj's castle, Valefor looked around and said that dragons used to live there, as the shape of the caves reminded her of the ones she used to live in before. Before they went in, Zagan ordered the girls to look for anything related to dragons and told Valefor she could take any book she wanted. As they made their way through the castle, they noticed a golem, which Zagan told them not to touch, as he hoped to avoid them getting attacked if it were to awaken. After they walked away from it, Valefor noticed a magic circle with draconian patterns on it and showed it to Zagan, who patted her on the head for a job well done. Valefor then activated the circle, which opened up a hidden passage to an underground library. While they looked around, Valefor stayed by Zagan's side, and he told her she could stay with them for as long as she wanted, so she hugged his side happily. The next moment, she noticed a book on the shelf, which contained the writings engraved on the sacred swords, and Zagan pointed out that they were very similar to the Arctiman crest. This made him conclude that learning about the swords would help him learn more about the Arctiman crest. Meanwhile, Chastil finally came face to face with Raphael, who commended her for being a fine knight, and asked how many sorcerers she had slain. Chastil told him it didn't concern him, causing her knights to caution her. Raphael simply laughed and called her ballsy, but warned that he could send her pair of plastic balls to the pearly gates. Just as her knights took a defensive stance, the cardinal arrived and asked Raphael to stop harassing her. However, Raphael refused to stand down and let the cardinal know that he wasn't opposed to the idea of cutting Chastil down, even though she had no means to defend herself. This forced the cardinal to take Chastil to his office and return her sword to her. He warned her to be careful of Raphael, but Chastil couldn't help but think Raphael had manipulated the cardinal to return her sword. When she returned to her office, she found a sealed letter on her desk, which pushed the thoughts of Raphael to the back of her mind. That night, Zagan went drinking with Barbatos, who told him that the church had summoned their best knight to hunt him down. He said Raphael was rumored to have eaten a dragon and slain 499 sorcerers. Hearing this made Zagan realize that Valefor's hatred for the angelic knights had something to do with Raphael, who everyone believed had eaten a dragon. While they were still talking, Raphael walked into the bar, causing most of the patrons to run away in fear. Zagan sensed him before he saw his reflection in his glass, so he told Barbatos that he was standing behind them, which made him turn around in shock. Immediately, Barbatos created a magic circle to attack Raphael, but Zagan hijacked Barbatos' circle and destroyed it. So Barbatos got in his face and asked if he had plans to die that night. Zagan calmly said Raphael didn't look like he'd come there to fight them, and then proceeded to offer Raphael a seat. As they sat facing one another, Raphael told Zagan he'd come to see him because he'd been curious about the kind of man he was. Zagan assured him that he wasn't all that, since he could never measure up to Harry Potter, causing Raphael to laugh out loud. However, Zagan didn't feel comfortable with the giant of a man, so he asked why he wasn't trying to get rid of him and Barbatos. Raphael said all he wanted was to find out if Zagan considered Chastil a worthy opponent since he'd fought her before. Zagan said she wasn't as skilled as a combat, but she was better than most knights he'd fought in the past. This made Raphael say that Chastil was a serious to the church, and they wouldn't hesitate to get rid of her. Zagan asked if he'd forgotten to take his meds that day because it made no sense that the church would want to get rid of one of their own. Raphael explained that she'd objected to the manhunt for him, making Zagan wonder if she was brave or just dumb. While he pondered this, Raphael got up to leave, but that made Zagan assume that he would try to harm Chastil. He immediately warned him not to do anything to her, as he knew Nephi considered her a friend and would be hurt if something happened to her. After Raphael's departure, Zagan asked Barbatos to check on Chastil, promising to give him a few books from Marcoja's collection in return. When Zagan returned home, he found Nephi and a sleeping Valefor waiting for him. Nephi explained that Valefor had insisted on waiting for him even though she was exhausted from moving books all day. Zagan gave Valefor a pat on the head and wondered if he ought to have gotten rid of Raphael since he was sure he was the source of her hatred. He was soon distracted by Nephi, who he suddenly saw in a different light. Like some love-struck fool, he began noticing things about her face all over again, so he leaned in to finally kiss her. However, it never happened because Barbatos arrived at that moment and stepped out of his shadows with an unconscious Chastil in his arms. He explained that she'd been poisoned, so Nephi put Valefor to the side and rushed to Chastil's side. The sudden movement caused Valefor to wake up, and the moment she laid her eyes on Chastil's sword, she went into beast mode. Fortunately, Zagan sensed her intentions and stopped her before she could get to Chastil. However, she complained that someone with a sacred sword had slain her father. He told her she couldn't harm Chastil because she wasn't the person she held a vendetta against. However, he acknowledged her need for revenge and promised to teach her the best way to get it. A few hours later, Chastil woke up in a room with Zagan, who explained that she'd been poisoned and asked if she remembered anything leading up to the attack. Chastil explained that she'd received an anonymous letter which asked her to go to a certain location. Upon getting to the location, she met with a cloaked person, who claimed he was part of the Reconciliation faction, a faction which believed that church and sorcerers could coexist and live together. She said the man invited her to join them, but she hesitated because she wasn't sure if her loyalty was being tested by the church. The man seemed to understand her, so he promised to give her time to think things through, but told her to call out the name Morobus if she ever needed help. After he left, she returned to her office where she drank the tea which she had no idea was poisoned and passed out. Zagan asked if she knew anyone who wanted her dead, and she said the only person she could think of was Raphael. However, Zagan told her that Raphael was more like the Queen of Hearts who preferred chopping off people's heads. He then told her to get some more rest and invited her to stay at the castle for as long as she wished since she was Nephi's friend. When he got up to leave, she begged him to stay until she fell asleep, so he turned the chair around and sat down. The next morning, Zagan put Chastil to work and told her that she had to earn her keep as his home wasn't a 5-star vacation resort. Chastil agreed to do it, and when she tried to speak to Valefor, the little girl told her not to speak to her. Chastil asked why she was acting hostile towards her, so Zagan explained that someone who wielded a sacred sword had murdered her father, which was why she didn't trust her. Chastil pointed out that it would be best if she left, but Zagan told her not to worry because Valefor was too proud to try and harm her. Fortunately, she simply placed a frog in Chastil's mop bucket. Zagan found the whole situation amusing and told Chastil to be grateful it was only a harmless frog. For the rest of the week, Valefor made Chastil's life a living hell by coming up with one devious plan or the other to frustrate her. One night, while Valefor was writing all her escapades in her journal, Zagan came to see her. Valefor assumed he'd come to scold her, but all he did was tell her not to mess with Chastil during mealtime. Zagan then asked her if she was okay with staying with him and Nephi, and told her that if she wanted to leave they wouldn't stop her. That night, Valefor dreamt of her father and how she'd stumbled upon Raphael drinking his blood on the day he died. She then got up and went to Chastil's room, but couldn't bring herself to do away with her. Very early the next morning, Nefi ran screaming to Zagan and informed him that Valefor was gone. It so happened that the night before, Valefor made up her mind to leave the castle because she believed that getting used to living there would make her abandon her revenge. She made sure to write down all her thoughts in her journal, which she left in her room before she flew away. She soon arrived at Markoja's castle, hoping to find something to give her the power to slay Raphael. However, she hesitated when she got to the door because she felt that stealing from Zagan was the same as betraying him. The next moment, she heard Raphael's voice loud and clear behind her. She was surprised he'd followed her without her knowledge. As soon as she laid eyes on him, her fear was replaced with hatred. Valefor remembered him immediately as the vile man she had found drinking her father's blood like some blood-hungry vampire. Raphael, on the other hand, had no idea who she was, so she foolishly tried to attack him, knowing fully well she was no match for him. Raphael nearly took her head off with a single swing of his sword. Fortunately, Zagan arrived just in time to stop him and joked about giving her a curfew since she was out so late. Valefor began to cry, asking why he'd come for her, and he told her it was because he understood what she was going through. She then ran to hug him, and as he hugged her back, she heard Nefi's voice asking if she was okay, since she was on the other side of the shadow portal. Zagan assured her that she was, but told her they would be home late as they had something important to take care of. Raphael asked Zagan why he was protecting someone else when it was common knowledge that sorcerers only cared about themselves. Zagan told him that Valefor wasn't just anyone else because she was his daughter. Unfortunately, this strengthened Raphael's resolve to get rid of Valefor even more. Zagan decided to defend her, so he got into a defensive stance after creating a small magic circle. Raphael summoned the flames of purification in his sword, which burned bright blue and released a small wave of energy. The energy wave surprisingly fractured Zagan's sorcery circle, so Raphael began boasting that his sword had once been used to cut down an Archdemon and purify his magic. Barbatos was visibly terrified, and Valefor asked an unfazed Zagan why he'd provoked Raphael into a fight she believed he wouldn't win. Zagan replied saying he wanted to keep the promise he made to teach her how to get revenge on her enemies by drawing out their true potential and crushing it. He created another magic crest, this one a bit bigger than the last, and charged at Raphael, who defended himself with his sword. The crest remained intact because Zagan had modified it after he fought Chastel, since he'd learned that the sacred sword could cut through his sorcery. This modified crest absorbed all the mana around it to maintain itself, and Raphael's purifying flame was simply fueling it. Even after Zagan managed to push him back, Raphael still tried to strike him down. Zagan moved out of the way just in time to allow the sword to hit the ground and scatter rocks about. Still, he charged at him again, so Zagan defended against his strike with his magic crest, which finally got destroyed. Zagan simply made a mental note to work on it again and increase its durability, since it shattered after taking 3 direct hits. Raphael tried to strike again, but he expected it and retaliated with a spell-filled punch that sent him flying into the door. It seemed he purposely made Raphael exhaust his purifying flames so he could be able to use his sorcery. Zagan was sure the blow had weakened Raphael, but the old man surprised him by getting back up and acknowledging his power. Meanwhile, Chastel found Nefi waiting by Barbatos' shadow, and Nefi told her that Zagan was fighting to protect Valefor from the person trying to harm her. Chastel made up her mind to go help them, but she hesitated because she believed it was her fault Valefor ran away and didn't think her help would be appreciated. As she pondered if lending Zagan a helping hand would put a target on her back, Nefi called out to her. Chastel immediately snapped out of her confused daze and asked the elf why she hadn't gone to help Zagan and Valefor. Nefi told her that Zagan had ordered her to wait for him and admitted that she was jealous of Chastel because she could go to him. She then pulled Chastel in for a hug and thanked her for being friends with them. Chastel began to cry and admitted that she was scared of dying, but also said she wanted to help Zagan fight. Nefi told her to do as her heart desired, even though it meant going against everything she knew and believed. After their tearful confessions, Chastel told Nefi to wait for their return while she went to help Zagan and Valefor. Back at Markoja's castle, Zagan and the others watched as Raphael's wounds healed by themselves, confirming that he did drink the blood of a dragon. Zagan then told Valefor that she could finally get her wish, so Raphael asked why she seemed to hate him so much. Valefor said it was because he murdered her father, the legendary sage dragon Orobas, in cold blood. She explained that one day after a group of angelic knights came to speak with her father, he flew off with them. When he didn't return after 7 days, she went in search of him, but all she found was his lifeless body with a sacred sword stabbed into it. The worst part was the fact that Raphael was drinking his blood like it was some grape juice he just found. After listening to her, Raphael declared that she also had to die and rushed towards her, but Zagan pushed him back. Raphael managed to remain on his feet and charged at Valefor again, just as Zagan tried to stop her from casting a spell. The next thing he knew, there was a bright light and Chastil was standing between Raphael and Valefor, restored pushing against his. They were surprised to see her, and that was when the idiot dumb Barbatos, who by the way was crushing it as an NPC, remembered he hadn't closed the portal. Valefor asked Chastil why she had come, and she gave her a whole ass speech on how it was her fault Valefor left home. Fortunately, she chose to end her sappy monologue, and asked Valefor to agree to a truce for the time being. At that point, Raphael was already growing weaker and began coughing up blood, so Zagan asked why he was desperately trying to die at their hands. He pointed out that after Valefor mentioned Orobus's name, all the fight in Raphael vanished. Hearing the name, Mage still realized that Raphael had been the mysterious cloaked man who invited her to join the Reconciliation faction. Just as Zagan demanded that he explain why he did all he did, he sensed a very sinister presence coming from inside the castle. The others sensed it as well, and when the creature stepped out, Zagan recognized it as the golem they had seen days before. He also noticed it was absorbing the mana from its surroundings to power itself, and would drain all of their mana in no time. He pieced together that the shock wave from Chastil and Raphael's swords had broken the seal and awakened it. Barbatos screamed at Zagan to do something, so he tried to order it back by using his Archdemon crest the same way he'd done with the demon they encountered before. However, since the golem was practically a mindless creature, it didn't obey his command. Instead, it fired a beam at them, and everyone except Valefor was able to move out of the way. Fortunately, Raphael got to her just in time to act as a meat shield and ended up losing his left arm in the process. Zagan got furious and destroyed the golem with his Heaven Scale spell. With the creature down, he walked over to Raphael and asked why he'd risked his life for Valefor, even though he'd been trying to get rid of her earlier. Raphael said he was simply doing his duty, but that didn't explain his sudden change of heart, so Zagan demanded an explanation. Raphael then opened up and admitted that he hadn't been the one to slay Orobus, because he wasn't powerful enough. He explained that he'd gone to seek out Orobus's help to slay a powerful demon that had emerged. Valefor accused him of making up stories and weaving tales just to cover up his crime, but Raphael insisted he was telling the truth. Valefor still didn't believe Raphael, but Zagan told her that he'd also encountered a demon before, so he couldn't be lying. However, Valefor found it hard to believe her father had been defeated by a demon. Raphael told her that Orobus had not been defeated by the demon because he gave his life to destroy it once and for all. Feeling overwhelmed, Valefor demanded to know where to focus all her hatred now that she knew the truth behind her father's death. Raphael asked her to trade her hatred for pride because her father had died trying to defend the world in which she lived. He said that if the demons returned to a world where the sorcerers and the knights were at each other's throats, the world would plunge into chaos. This was why Orobus had asked him to keep on living and do his best to unite them, so he decided to drink his blood to strengthen himself. He told them that he was willing to die and leave Chastil in charge of completing the mission he started. Just as Chastil argued that she hadn't agreed to head the Reconciliation faction, the golem began to move again. Zagan said he'd take care of it once and for all, but Raphael explained that the golem wasn't an ordinary one. He told them that Marcosia had taken the remains of the demon he and Orobus fought and transformed it into the creature before them. Zagan already knew that defeating the golem wouldn't be easy, but he decided to give it a shot. And just as he began approaching it, Chastil stopped him. She offered to create a chance for him to strike the golem down, and then summoned her purifying flames. After she charged at the golem, she used her sword to cut through its beam and absorb it. This allowed Zagan to smash its arm with one of his new spells, but he noticed it piecing back together using its essence. Chastil quickly cut it into smaller pieces, which gave Zagan the chance to hit the body with his Heaven's Phosphor spell, which was the Heaven Scale spell that he had inverted and cast into the golem so it would explode. Chastil praised him for his fast thinking, and the two of them agreed that they would help each other out even though they were meant to be sworn enemies. With the golem destroyed, Zagan tried to heal Raphael, but his wounds were too deep. Raphael told him it didn't matter if he died, because he believed Chastil would carry on where he left off. This made Zagan ask why so many sorcerers had died by his hand, even though he said he wanted to unite the two factions. Raphael explained that he had only been trying to defend himself because any time he approached the sorcerers they attacked him. That was when they all realized he'd been misunderstood because of his appearance and lack of communication skills. He then promised to take care of the person who poisoned Chastel, and told Valefor that she could have his head when he finished his mission. After he walked away, Valefor admitted that she didn't feel like taking his life, so Zagan took her hand and said it was time to return home. At the church, Chastel's knights informed the cardinal that she was missing, so he instructed them to find her at all costs. However, after they left, the crazy old man complained that she hadn't died and was still in possession of her sacred sword. It so happened that he had become blinded by his beliefs that the church was the only place with good people. This was why he got rid of those he deemed to be sinners, just because they went against the church. The next moment, Raphael kicked the door down, and as soon as the cardinal saw his condition, he insisted he get treated at once. Raphael assured him that he was fine, but the sneaky old fart decided that getting rid of Raphael would be a great idea. He poured some of the poison onto his palm before trying to convince Raphael to let him apply it to his wounds. However, he was surprised when his hand fell off after Raphael cut it off and told him he didn't like to be touched with poison. The cardinal fell to the floor as he screamed in pain, but Raphael shut him up by placing his foot in his mouth before he finished him off. The next morning, Zagan informed Chastel that the cardinal had been the one to poison her, so Raphael got rid of him. She admitted that she suspected he was the one behind it, but she prayed she was wrong. She then went to speak with Valefor, who refused to let her touch her head, so she turned to leave. However, Valefor called out to her and told her that she could visit them from time to time, which made her happy. On her way out, Raphael tapped her shoulder, causing her to scream in surprise as she believed he was dead. He explained that aside from the healing ability he gained from Orobas, Nephi had used her powers to help him recover faster. He also added that he'd retired from being a knight and was now working as Zagan's very own Alfred. While Chastel tried to make sense of his words, Zagan recalled how they had found him outside the castle. He'd managed to hold on long enough because he wanted Valefor to end his life, but she forgave him and insisted that he work for Zagan instead. Zagan agreed to let him stay because he reminded him of himself, but he didn't dare to let anyone know that. Valefor then approached Raphael and offered him the arm from the armor she wore when she pretended to be a sorcerer. Raphael thanked her for it, after which they all escorted Chastel outside and bid her farewell. Barbatos popped out of nowhere and asked them to feed him. Zagan promised to feed him if he agreed to watch over Chastel, but he refused, so he offered to pay him, which was enough to get him to agree and follow Chastel. A few weeks later, Zagan, Nephi, and Valefor went shopping in town, so they stopped by Manuela's store to visit her. While they were there, Zagan noticed an old phonograph, which Manuela said had been left by the street kids. This made him remember his days on the street and how he was always looking for things he could sell. He then told Manuela he would buy the phonograph and gave her a large bag of money even though the phonograph wasn't working. By the time they got home, they found Barbatos and Chastel waiting for them since Nephi had invited Chastel for dinner. When Zagan saw Barbatos, he told him that he hadn't been invited, but Barbatos said he deserved a break after all the stress he'd gone through watching over Chastel. Meanwhile, the girls went to the kitchen to prepare dinner, and Chastel proved she was useless in the kitchen from the very start by throwing things around. Zagan went to the library to fix the phonograph, and Barbatos took the chance to complain about how Chastel was a clumsy idiot. He said she was accident-prone, and he couldn't rest properly because he was always looking out for her. Back in the kitchen, Nephi took a sip of the soup Chastel prepared and nearly died. However, she refused to let her know that the soup tasted worse than my last relationship. When it was time for dinner, they all gathered in the dining room where Zagan played music from the phonograph he'd managed to repair before they began eating. During the meal, a drunk Barbatos let it slip that he was aware Chastel had a stuffed animal. Chastel accused him of watching her from his shadows, but he assured her that her knick-knack racks weren't something he wished to see very often. When things began to escalate, Zagan threw his fork at Barbatos' head, and Nephi told Chastel that Barbatos had been the one to bring her to them when she got poisoned. Chastel tried to thank him, but the rude imbecile cut her off, saying he didn't want her gratitude, which annoyed her. Before she could pop off on him, the phonograph began acting up, so Raphael went to turn it off. Zagan then asked them to act like adults, so Barbatos sighed and began drinking the soup Chastel prepared. Unfortunately, he passed out immediately, and that was when Chastel realized she'd never make it as a chef. Later that night, while Chastel and Barbatos slept, Nephi joined Zagan in the throne room where he was fixing up the phonograph. When it began working again, Nephi started singing a song which surprised Zagan, but he liked it nevertheless. He then asked her to dance, which she said yes to, but soon remembered that he had no idea how to dance. Fortunately, Raphael, who had been watching them together with Valefor, stepped forward and offered to teach them how to dance. After they danced for a while, Raphael snuck away with a sleeping Valefor, so they could have some privacy. When they were alone, they continued dancing while looking each other in the eye, with all the love they couldn't express with their mouths. That's all for today, guys. If you like anime recaps like this, check out this video over here.